order for the hospital to care for other babies who had a greater chance of surviving. The parents were compelled to say goodbye to their son. But an unbelievable occurrence occurred when the life support was turned off. Chris and Monica stood in the hospital pediatric ward's dark light, stunned and in shock. The dismal scene in which they received the most heartbreaking news any parent could hear was surrounded by the sound of the monitors and the whirring of the medical apparatus. The doctor replied with a professional coolness that barely concealed the weight of their words. "Your son. Well, he won't make it. There are many other babies in need of an incubator." "How can you say that?" The unfortunate woman clutched the incubator where her baby, Dennis, was struggling for his life with shaking hands as her tears traced salty trails down her face. The strength of the frantic love she felt, a love that would not accept the unacceptable, stood in stark contrast to her son's frailty. Her husband was beside her, looking as terrified as he was furious. A poisonous concoction of incredulity and impotence simmered in his breast as he felt anger. "Are you abandoning our son? Does he not also require the incubator?" He spoke up to the doctors, his voice heavy with a pain that felt almost tangible. He glanced at his tiny warrior, his infant child, whose struggle for survival was playing out in front of him. A struggle that now appeared to have ended at random. The physicians, on the other hand, held steadfast. Even though the severity of their remarks was hidden by the compassion in their eyes, striking a balance between clinical necessity and human decency. They said, "Unfortunately, we're running low on incubators and we're about to receive a large transfer with 3 more babies who need immediate care. It's not a question of giving up, but we're in a position where we have to make extremely difficult decisions." The parents' agony was further made worse by the disclosure. "Can't you see he's fighting?" Monica persisted, her request tinged with a desperate blend of fear and hope. "He wants to live." Still, it appeared as though they had no control over the outcome. No amount of reasoning or pleading could change the planned verdict. The last words spoken by the medical staff were, "In 3 days, we'll need to vacate the incubator." And they did so with such assurance that they firmly sealed Dennis's fate. The parents' suffering was beyond words. Chris and Monica treasured every moment they spent with their son. Every breath was valuable. Every look into his face a frozen moment. A whispered goodbye as the encounter drew to an end. So, in the pediatric ward, amidst the sound of machinery and the reverberation of crushed hearts, the parents readied themselves for the unthinkable, bidding farewell to their infant boy and confronting the depths of bereavement. A situation that they never anticipated to come to pass in spite of all the warnings. The impoverished couple was a newlywed pair full of hope and excitement about beginning a family. They were soon engulfed in a flood of happiness and future plans upon learning of the pregnancy. The trip that came next, though, was anything from simple. Monica's health and hopes were put to the test from the beginning of her pregnancy, which was plagued by problems. The situation got even worse when Dennis was born. The infant was placed in an incubator because the young mother was battling for her life after nearly dying during childbirth. The child was diagnosed with bronchopulmonary dysplasia, BPD, a rare disease that primarily affects premature babies and makes it difficult for them to breathe and oxygenate their blood. In an effort to stabilize Dennis's health, doctors performed a battery of tests and procedures as they remained by his side non-stop. BPD causes the lung tissues in Dennis to become more brittle and ineffective in oxygen exchange. they said, attempting to put the infant's ongoing battle for survival into context. They went on, giving the small child a grim picture of his situation. We're doing our best. But his condition is severely complicated by the prematurity of his birth and the extent of the lung damage. Chris and Monica had been living in the hospital since Dennis's birth. The woman, whose days had previously been devoted to her flower store, now passed every second by her son's incubator, praying for a healing. In contrast, the father assumed complete responsibility for the shop and split his time between hospital visits and work. He made an effort to be strong, but his little boy's anguish and fear of losing him overcame him. Frequently, he would find himself alone in the flower store, silently weeping and pleading for his son's survival. Chris was a devout man who faced daily challenges to his religion. Monica, however, took her son's illness as evidence that the God her husband so fervently worshipped was unreal. Her eyes clouded with pain and resentment. She cried, "How can God allow a little baby to suffer so much? Our son shouldn't be in this predicament if there is a higher power," she remarked, growing less and less confident in her husband's intercession. Dennis's circumstances seemed to worsen with day that went by. The small boy's illness was incurable, so the physicians did their best to provide him with some consolation and solace. But there was little hope. Every morning was a tormenting cycle of optimism for the impoverished parents, as they faced increasing worry and uncertainty. And they clutched to each other in desperation, trying to find solace in the cruel fact that their baby's life was in danger. Things were becoming worse rather than better. The next 3 days were a genuine agony for them both. The baby was battling for his life in the hospital, and their unceasing grief was evident everywhere. The mother sat by the incubator all day, silent tears streaming down her face like a melancholy tune to the constant beeping of the monitors. Chris, on the other hand, took solace in his faith and knelt down for hours in prayer, asking for a miracle that never seemed to materialize. "Chris, please stop. There is no such God as yours. Do you not realize that our son's condition is just growing worse?" In a desperate time, Monica screamed. She was filled with suffering and was just angry and incredulous. Recognizing that it was her pain communicating, the man gave her a tender embrace and provided the only solace he could. All he knew was that they had to stand by each other no matter what their beliefs were. He had no answers. The nights were even longer than the days. They stayed by their son's side, observing his pallid little face while they sang him lullabies that Dennis might never get to hear again. They had a conversation with him, telling him about their flower company and their desire to spend sunny days together as a family. It was a last-ditch effort to impose some semblance of normalcy on an extremely abnormal situation. And then the last night came at last. Dennis would be removed from life support the next morning. It was decided. The news struck the impoverished parents like a sentence. An unavoidable, brutal blow from fate. Chris prayed again that night, his words merely a whisper in the stillness of the room. His only source of illumination the gentle glow of the machines. "May the Lord grant us the strength to get through this trying moment." He wept silently for his young kid, saying, "May your will be done, and not mine. If your will is to take our son." It was a prayer of farewell, an appeal for the fortitude to endure the intolerable. That father had no other support but his faith in that moment of complete vulnerability. despite a portion of him questioning whether God's will coincided with his own. It was excruciating to wait for the next morning. Every moment seemed to drag on forever, as they faced the most painful and uncertain reality. Saying goodbye to their only son, the couple clasped hands. However, none was ready for what was going to occur that evening. That evening, with family members at home and the hospital enveloped in a profound quiet, Dennis is kept alive simply by the sound of the machine while the patients are asleep. After a few hours of continual watchfulness, the parents' physical and mental tiredness allowed them to sleep next to the baby's incubator, where they could spend less painful moments than in reality. During those brief hours, a remarkable event took place. With her thoughts still entangled in the labyrinth of sleep, Monica awoke slowly. That feeling you get when you're still tired and you think you see things? She perceived, or believed she perceived, a glowing figure adjacent to the young boy's incubator. There was something calm, almost angelic, about the presence, even though her vision was foggy, like if she were staring through a hazy haze. Dennis felt the figure's delicate, ethereal touch as it leaned over him. The infant seemed to feel an intangible warmth as a pure, brilliant beam of light appeared to emanate from the figure's palm and cover his body. At first, Monica was unable to move or talk, so all she could do was stare while the otherworldly being touched her kid. A wave of panic overcame her, and at last the curtain of sleep lifted, allowing her to yell loudly, "Someone's there!" She pointed to a vacant area beside the incubator and exclaimed. Her husband sprang awake at the scream. "What? Where?" he inquired, perplexed. Again, the woman said, "Over there. Look over there. Please." When her eyes finally adjusted, the monster had vanished, leaving just the sensation of a once real presence. She turned to show Chris where the figure was. Someone was standing there. "I had a glimpse of him." Monica looked shocked, unable to completely comprehend. Chris started crying, not from perplexity, but from the unexpected surge of emotion that engulfed him. He was joined by his wife, whose sobs revealed the crushing weight of the reality they were about to confront. They had just 1 hour left before having to bid their son farewell for good. It was almost daybreak. Muttering, "Oh no, my poor son." The mother moved closer to the incubator. They made an effort to be strong, but at that very moment, strength appeared to elude them, leaving them open to suffering and impending loss. They tried to ingrain in their hearts and thoughts the image of their little baby, who would soon be stolen from them. By spending that final hour learning every feature of Dennis's small face, including every hair strand and curve of his nose, the doctors arrived at 6, and their faces conveyed a clinical melancholy. They softly announced, as if compelled by the monotony of suffering, that the gadgets needed to be turned off. The parents were finally given permission to hold their son Dennis one last time before he was placed in the incubator. The tenderness and warmth of his small body were palpable sensations as they lifted him into their arms. He was reliant on the machines that would soon be turned off, and his breathing was labored. "Goodbye, my love," they whispered, their voices quivering from the depth of their grief. After that, the physicians gave the go-ahead to switch off the machines. After that, there was an ear-piercing hush as the cries of 2 parents grieving their son filled the void. The distraught woman yelled out, No, as her husband pinned her. They cautiously disabled the life support systems that Dennis was relying on. As his breaths became increasingly spaced out, his small chest seemed to grind down to a halt. As she watched the baby's agonized stillness, the mother's eyes remained fixed on him, her body trembling from the emotions that were consuming her. In the presence of his wife, Chris allowed himself to cry openly, mirroring the anguish felt by a father who has lost a child. A thunderous flatline replaced the infant's heartbeat, which had been accompanied by the monitor's incessant beeping. No parent should ever have to say goodbye, and the moment was filled with profound sadness. The truth became crystal clear as the medics removed the incubator, exposing Dennis's serene face, which had become silent and motionless. "You're with God now, my son," the father murmured quietly, his heart broken by grief and his faith. Something out of the ordinary occurred, though. The extraordinary occurrence clearly caught everyone off guard. Dennis started breathing on his own, which was an unexpected and highly illogical development. He lets out a small, nearly unnoticeable sigh first. Then his small hands make delicate movements. And then his small eyes open. "Look, darling. Look," the woman exclaimed, her voice filled with shock. The room was filled with the fragile yet vibrant sound of the baby's cry as it cried out and inhaled multiple times. The physicians couldn't believe what they saw and hurried to be by his side. Just like the parents, they proclaimed, "Good Lord. It's a miracle," as they monitored Dennis's vital signs. He was obviously battling for his life in a way no one had dared to hope for. "Oh, my son. Oh God." As Monica cradled her newborn child in her arms, she let out a piercing scream and jumped up and down, her tears a mixture of ecstasy and pain. She looked across at her spouse. "He really exists," they declared. "Love. There is a God." The sparkle of her faith had returned to her eyes, knowing that his wish had been realized. The father was so overwhelmed with thankfulness and relief that he collapsed to his knees. He rose to his feet, his gaze remaining locked on his son, who had become an embodiment of optimism and wonder. "Oh God. Thank you, Lord." As he gazed at his wife, he could see that she was holding Dennis close as she broke down into tears of joy and muttered, "Thank you, God." At that very moment, the lady acknowledged not just God's presence, but also his boundless mercy and love. Everyone there was filled with emotion, both in disbelief and excitement at the miracle they were seeing. The room was filled with the resounding sound of the baby's cry, which had transformed into a cry of triumph over hardship. It served as a powerful reminder of the transformative power of faith, love, and hope. With an air of reverence and expertise, the medical staff performed a battery of tests in their quest to make sense of the unexplainable. Because the baby was no longer sick, the results rendered the medical staff stunned. It was as if the boy had been born anew. It had vanished without a trace. There was no trace of the illness that had nearly killed Dennis. He had been cured. It was as if the BPD, the illness that had put him in the incubator and endangered his life, had vanished into thin air. The neighborhood and the hospital were informed of the miraculous baby's arrival in no time. A number of doctors came to see Dennis since they were all curious by the boy's miraculous recovery. For people of all faiths and no faith, his story became an inspiration because it showed that everything is possible when you put your mind to it. Dennis and his parents were greeted with a round of applause a few days later. On the day he was discharged from the hospital, members of his medical team, as well as other patients who had heard about his condition, came together to rejoice in his recovery. The happiness was tangible. With the clapping, the crowd celebrated not only the baby's existence but also the miraculous turn of events that had allowed him or her to experience it to the fullest. And Dennis's life was full and joyful just like that. He never again had to worry about his health as he matured. His parents' excitement was matched only by his natural interest and boundless enthusiasm as he developed normally. However, he was more than just a kid, he embodied the miracle that his life was. Not only did he motivate those close to him, but he also received visitors from far and wide. Captivated by the narrative of the youngster who conquered the seemingly insurmountable, his presence was a powerful defense against pessimism and despair. And he became a beacon of hope for many. The young lad had a contented life as a result. The family's unwavering commitment to their faith and love shone brightly every day, proving that there is always hope, healing, and regeneration, no matter how terrible things may seem. As the young man who never failed to amaze and inspire anybody fortunate enough to cross his path, Dennis left an indelible impression on the world. Surrounded by love, adoration, and a strong sense of purpose, he was known as the baby who survived against all chances. After watching the story above, do you have any thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. If you enjoyed our video, please like, subscribe, and share our channel. That's all about today's stories. See you next time.